My name is Alex Carpenter, and thanks to Skylar for having me on the series. I'm going to start with question 1. What does new music or experimental music mean to you? And I don't know, I have a few different kind of thoughts on this. I mean, on the surface, obviously, new music can just mean music that's created now by a living artist. But going a little deeper, it could mean kind of any kind of art form using sound in a way that is new, or at least reimagined from different forms. And that could or should include new framings of the parameters of music itself as well. To me, though, what gets confusing, and I think what results in a lot of frankly boring new music to me, is when the idea of newness and like radicalism extends only so far as the creative act, meaning the artwork itself, rather than to like a newness of perception. And you know, I can create a piece of music with a form that's totally new and unique, and no one will have ever done it before, maybe. But that doesn't necessarily mean that someone's going to have a new and transformative experience listening to it. So for me, it's about the perception and the experience of listening. And you know, I think of the minimalism of the 60s. It's kind of taught us that there can be a newness of perception actually from very simple means and forms that aren't necessarily new at all. And that's kind of what excites me, this idea of a focused form that challenges the habits of perception a little bit. A piece of mine I wrote, which I called Mountain Piece, it used 20 drummers playing 20 drums, and they were all increasing and then decreasing the speed of their drumming over the course of like 30 minutes or so. And they were all together in terms of going with the same arc in the same timing, but they weren't synchronizing their rhythm. So as a listener, you have this experience of hearing rhythm at first that slowly transforms into texture. And then as it slows down, that texture slowly transforming back into rhythm. And those are two elements of music that we would expect to remain separate. Okay, so question 2 is, how do I work? I'm going to start answering that question by first saying what kind of excites me musically, and that is complex sounds that are made up of simple parts. And so, you know, along those lines, some of the first group performances I did were using multiple performers who each were given a simple phrase. It might be 3 notes, it might be 4 notes, and usually that phrase has inbuilt variations that they can choose, and usually an overall arc or instruction. For example, start at a certain speed and continually slow down. I mean, the goal is, I guess, to open the gates for interactions of sound that might not necessarily have been planned. You also get microtonal variations of harmony based on what the performers are hearing in relation to one another. you also get different textures and timbres that you can't necessarily notate on a score. So I would work with performers kind of with the parts written down, but also verbally communicating with them as to how they might react to certain things, and what harmonies and tunings they might emphasize, and also kind of underhandedly putting, I don't know, that saxophone player right next to this keyboard amp, because I know that, if they're hearing what this keyboard is playing, I'm going to like the way that they're pushing their note a little harder, and that kind of thing. So there's a little bit of behind the scenes calculation in terms of placement and planning too. Before I finish this question, I guess the main point I was trying to get to was how I tend to work more now, which is, particularly after moving to New York, I wanted the same kind of effects as a multi-performer scenario, but using simpler means. And so I started leaning a little more on another technique I was using, which is basically a network of delay pedals, channeling off into separate amps, and they're all being fed the same, well, the sound from the same source, which in most cases is me playing a guitar, but going through delay pedals that are each going to a separate amp. So you have the amps, in a sense, are replacing the performers. So you do get the sounds coming from different areas of the room spatially, and also following different length loops that might not necessarily coincide timing wise. And so you get a similar kind of effect where you have multiple sound sources combining to create something that isn't so much planned. Another part of that approach, though, that I kind of learned that maybe I didn't quite expect, was actually the building of the sound, which was a cool thing. And by that I mean you have what I like to kind of call an audio canvas. It's second 1 to second 20, where the note keeps repeating, and you're able to stand back, listen to it, assess it, decide what it needs to keep it company. So you play, you might play note 2, and you put that into the bank of sound, and then you have 2 notes playing back at you every 20 seconds. And again, 2 points, they create a line. What does that line need? Maybe it needs a third note, and then you have a triangle. And then so my point is, as you start building these cells, you start to see a shape emerge, and then you can kind of emphasize that shape. And again, you end up with something that hasn't come from your learned vocabulary and from your learned kind of habits as a performer. It's coming from something else. And that was a cool thing to realize, that kind of the delay created an empty space, and by approaching it with a kind of a curiosity and a reverence, you can get something appearing in that empty space that is way cooler than anything you could have planned or composed. So question 3 is tell me a secret. I think to answer this, I'm going to go back to question 1, or go back to what I said for question 1 when I was talking about mountain piece. I think my secret would be, and again, I know this is not necessarily new or original, and you may already know this, but the elements of music that we like to keep separate and we have different labels for are actually linked. And an example of that would be, harmony and timbre. You have, when you look at, the physics of a sound up close, you realize it's made up of lots of different waveforms interacting. And within that, even though you might only perceive one sound or one tone, let's say it's a C, if you listen to it long enough and if you look into it and analyze it scientifically, also you realize it may be made up of lots of different tones that are not just C. There's a G in there, there's an E perhaps in there, there's a flattened B flat. There's a lot of different sounds that we might have different labels for that are going into making up the character and the timbre of that sound. And so, but when we look at it that way, it looks more like a harmony in terms of how we understand the building blocks of music. So I think that's pretty cool. It's that harmony kind of magnified is timbre, and zooming out from timbre you get harmony. The same can be said of rhythm and texture, and that's again what I was trying to explore with the mountain piece. It's that speed up rhythm enough to where you can't necessarily distinguish the different notes or the different spaces between the notes that are making that a rhythm, and it becomes texture. And slow a texture down where you have a distinction of durations and notes, and you get something that's more understandable as a rhythm. And again, not necessarily an original or new idea, but it's pretty cool nonetheless.